Good evening. Welcome back to Mystery History for Sleep. I am Mr. H. Tonight, we gather here, in the quiet of our own time, to look back. We are not just telling a story of a great flood. We are not here simply to recount a myth of destruction, a purification. We often think of the gods, particularly Zeus, as capricious. We see them as wrathful, acting on sudden impulse. But the story of the great Greek flood, the deluge of Deucalion, is something more. It is a story of necessity. It is the story of a world that had become so heavy with its own cruelty, so loud with its own hubris, that it could no longer sustain itself. The very fabric of existence had been strained to its breaking point. Imagine, if you will, a world that has forgotten what it means to be human, a world where kindness is weakness, and empathy is a word without meaning. This was the age the poets called the Age of Bronze. It was not our age. The people who walked the earth then were different. They were, as the old texts tell us, born from the ash tree. They were immense, violent, and terrible. Their hearts were not made of flesh, but of adamant. Their only passion was war. They did not eat bread. They did not cultivate the land. They consumed one another. They devoured the world around them, their cities ringing not with music or laughter, but with the constant, grinding clang of bronze weaponry being forged, and the screams of those weapons being used. Zeus, from his throne on Olympus, looked down, and he did not see devotion. He did not see art. He did not see prayer. He saw only the smoke of burning villages. He heard only the weeping of the innocent and the boasts of the guilty. Poseidon, his brother, ruler of the seas, felt the vibrations, the ceaseless tremor of armies marching, of walls falling. The oceans themselves grew restless, tainted by the blood that flowed from the rivers. It was a world without xenia, without hospitality, a world where a stranger at the gate was not seen as an opportunity for grace, but as prey. And that is why Zeus walked among them. He had to see for himself if the sickness was truly terminal. He disguised himself, taking on the humble form of a traveler, and sought shelter. And everywhere he went, he was met with suspicion, with cruelty, and with locked doors, until, finally, he arrived at the gates of King Lycaon, a king who ruled over the most savage of men, a king who, upon hearing the rumor that his guest might be a god, decided not to worship, but to mock, to test, to defile. The air in the great hall was thick, thick with smoke from the roasting pits, thick with the smell of spilled wine, and thick with a tension so profound it was almost a sound. At the head of the long table sat the king, Lycaon, a man whose arrogance was a fortress, whose eyes held a dark, testing gleam. He smiled at his guest, a traveller who had appeared at his gates, claiming to be a god in disguise. A test. What better way to test a god than to offer him the ultimate taboo? The platter was set down. The guest, the weary traveller, looked at the steaming meat. He did not need to taste it. He did not need to ask. He was Zeus, the king of Olympus, the father of gods and men, and he knew. He knew what this meat was. He knew whose life had been taken to prepare this grotesque offering. A silence fell upon the hall. It was not a human silence, not the mere absence of speech. It was a divine silence, a terrible, cold vacuum that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. The fires in the hearth sputtered, their flames turning a sickly, pale blue. The boastful laughter of Lycaon's sons died in their throats. The king's smile froze, the arrogance finally cracking to reveal the terror beneath. The traveller looked up from the plate, and his eyes were no longer the eyes of a weary man. They were the eyes of the storm. By offering his guest the flesh of a murdered man, Lycaon was not just committing an atrocity, he was holding up a mirror to the entire human race. He was declaring, in the loudest possible terms, that nothing was sacred, that there was no line they would not cross. And in that cold, terrible silence in the feasting hall, Zeus understood. There could be no cure for this. There could be no healing. The fever had to break. The world had to be washed clean. The slate had to be wiped, returned to its original silent state, so that something new, something better, could one day, perhaps, grow. This is the story we are exploring tonight. It is a story about the end of everything, but it is also, profoundly, a story about a beginning. The rain has not yet begun. The air is still and heavy, holding its breath. The world does not yet know it is living on borrowed time. Before the floodgates of heaven could be opened, before Poseidon would be unleashed to shatter the boundaries of the earth, the world had to be defined. The Greeks did not see time as we do, as a straight line. They saw it as a cycle, a degradation. To understand the rain, we must first understand the ages of man. We must understand the golden age that was lost, the silver age that failed, and the bronze age that had become unbearable. To understand this unbearable world, we must first understand what it fell from. The Greeks, the poets like Hesiod who first wrote these stories down, did not see time as we do. We see an upward line of progress, of technology, of enlightenment. They saw something quite different. They saw a great winding down, a cosmic decline, a degradation, age by age, where each new generation of humanity was a paler, colder, and more broken echo of the one that came before. They looked at the world around them, a world of hardship, of iron tools, of difficult harvests and sudden brutal wars, and they felt a profound sense of loss, a nostalgia for a time they had never known. They believed that things had not always been this way. They remembered, in their myths, a better time. This memory was structured into the great ages of man. The very first age, the beginning of it all, was the Golden Age. This was not a time of Zeus. It was the time before Zeus, when the Titan Cronus, whom the Romans would later call Saturn, still ruled the heavens. In this age, humanity lived in effortless peace. They were formed directly by the immortal gods, and they lived among them like favored children. Imagine a world without labor. The earth, the Gaia, poured forth her bounty without being asked. The fields were heavy with grain that no one had planted. The oak trees wept thick, golden honey. The rivers ran with milk and nectar. There was no need for ships to cross the sea, for the whole world was known, and it was all paradise. There was no need for walls, for there was no concept of theft. There was no need for law, for every heart was its own perfect law. The people of the Golden Age felt no sorrow. They felt no pain. And most strangely, they did not feel the heavy burden of age. They were vibrant and strong, and when their time came to an end, after a long and peaceful life, they did not die. They simply lay down and were overcome by a gentle sleep, a passing. Why did the Greeks tell this story? Because it creates a name for that persistent, quiet ache in the human heart. That feeling that the world as it is somehow wrong, that we are exiles from a garden we cannot recall. The Golden Age is the myth of perfect innocence. But this age had to end. Cronus was overthrown by his son, Zeus, in the great war of the gods, the Titanomachy. The cosmos was reordered, and with the new king of Olympus came a new and vastly inferior race of men. This was the Silver Age. If the Golden Age was defined by effortless perfection, the Silver Age was defined by a grotesque, protracted immaturity. The gods of Olympus fashioned this new race, but they built them flawed. The children of the Silver Age were not children for a few years. They were children for 100 years. Imagine that. A century of witless infancy, 100 years spent clinging to their mothers, babbling in their homes, never seeing the sun, never learning, never growing in wisdom, only in body. They were pale, weak, and perpetually dependent. And when, finally, after 100 years, they reached their stunted adulthood, their lives were short, brutal, and filled with pain. They were violent with one another. But their greatest sin, the sin that sealed their fate, was one of arrogance and ingratitude. They forgot the gods. They would not sacrifice. They would not build altars. They would not give the Olympians, their creators, the honor that was their due. They looked at the world with the dull, ungrateful eyes of a spoiled child. And Zeus, looking down, felt not pity, but a cold, rising disgust. This was not the malice of the Bronze Age. This was the failure of immaturity. It was the story the Greeks told to explain the human capacity for taking the universe for granted. It was a warning against failing to show gratitude. Zeus would not tolerate it. His new order required respect. It required acknowledgement. And so, in a fit of anger, Zeus put them away. He buried them beneath the earth. They did not die in glory. They were simply cleared away. They became the blessed spirits of the underworld, lesser spirits, shades, remembered, but powerless. The world was empty again. Zeus must have paused. His first creation, the golden, was lost to his father's time. His second, the silver, was a failed experiment. He would try a third time. And this third time, he would make a terrible, glorious, and catastrophic mistake. He did not craft them from gold or from silver. He crafted them from the ash tree, the melia. The ash tree, to the ancient Greeks, was not just a tree. It was the wood from which the strongest, deadliest spears were carved. And so humanity was born, quite literally, from the very wood of weapons. This was the Bronze Age. They were, in a word, terrible. Hesiod describes them as terrible and strong. They were not like us. They were immense. Their bodies were massive. Their hearts were not flesh, but adamant and unfeeling, unbreakable, diamond-hard substance. Their souls were as hard as their hearts, and they lived for only one thing, the work of Ares, war. They did not eat bread. This detail is profound. They did not cultivate the land. They did not sow. They did not harvest. They did not participate in the gentle, cyclical work of civilization, of Demeter. They were not farmers. They were takers. They consumed the beasts of the field. They hunted. They slaughtered. And they slaughtered each other. Imagine this world, a world without softness. The air would have smelled of copper and smoke. The only sound would have been the clang, clang, clang of the forge, day and night, as they hammered out their bronze weapons, their bronze armor, their bronze-walled houses. The sun itself would have seemed metallic, a brass shield in the sky. This was the age of pure, unadulterated violence. They were, in essence, a race of monsters, a plague of self-aware weapons walking the earth. Why tell this story? Why imagine this? Because this age is the shadow self of humanity. It is the Greek imagination grappling with the simple, terrifying fact that man is the most dangerous animal of all. It is the fear of what we are capable of when all restraint is gone. It is, perhaps, a dark, distorted cultural memory of a real time, a pre-civilized time, a time of migration and collapse, of warlords and chaos, a time before the poets, a time before the law. The Bronze Age is the beast within. How did this age end? In Hesiod's telling, the story is almost clean. He says they were destroyed by their own hands. They fell upon each other with such relentless, mindless fury that they simply annihilated themselves. A species committing mass suicide through warfare, they descended into the dark house of Hades, nameless, unmourned, and forgotten. But the story, as it echoed through other tellings, was not so clean. The Bronze Age did not just die out, it festered. Its violence was so profound that it stained the very stones of the earth. The world was saturated with its cruelty. Even as they destroyed each other, their spirit remained. Their ethos of might makes right lingered like a poison in the air. The age did not end with a whisper. It had to be ended. It had to be scoured. This is the world Zeus saw when he looked down from Olympus. He did not see a few scattered violent tribes. He saw an entire world philosophy of violence, a world that had forgotten the peace of the Golden Age and had spat on the gods of the Silver Age, a world that had become, in its essence, a temple to war, malice, and a hubris so deep it believed it owed nothing to anyone, not even its creator. This was the world, a world running a fever of bronze, a world that had become so twisted, so hard, so antithetical to life itself, that it had given birth to a king like Lycaon. Lycaon was not an outlier. He was the archetype. He was the perfect, final, and most articulate symptom of the disease. The sickness had been diagnosed. The only remaining question was the cure. We find a strange comfort in these ancient anxieties, in knowing that humanity has always grappled with great fears, and has always found a way to tell the story of its own survival. And in this shared comfort, we create a quiet space all across the world. I often wonder where you are as my voice reaches you. What time is it for you as we prepare to step into the past? If you find a measure of peace in these explorations, in this global community of quiet, I am glad you are here, and if you wish to join us for future journeys, perhaps consider subscribing. There is always room for one more, whatever your time zone may be. There is never any hurry. The king of Olympus, the gatherer of clouds, the wielder of the thunderbolt, made a decision. He would not send a messenger. He would not send Hermes, his swift and clever son. This he would do himself. This he owed to the world he had, in his new reign, allowed to fester. He stood, and the very act of his rising hushed the divine hall. He did not announce his plan. He simply walked from the light, and he began to lessen. It was not a transformation in a flash of lightning. It was a draining, a hollowing out. The divine light that wreathed him, the ichor that sang in his veins, the sheer crushing weight of his power, he let it all reside. He pulled it inward, deep into the core of his being, and shielded it. His form shrank. The divine, perfect musculature softened. His skin, which held the luminescence of the stars, grew papery, wrinkled, and liver-spotted. His back, which held the sky, bent under a new, unfamiliar weight. Gravity. He felt the sudden, shocking ache in his knees, the dryness in his throat, the grit of mortality under his fingernails. His all-seeing eyes grew dim, clouded with the rheum of old age. He leaned upon a simple wooden staff, and for the first time in an eon, he truly needed it. He became a man, an old man, a traveller, with no home, no name, and nothing but the dusty rags on his back. He walked down the slopes of Olympus. The air, crisp and thin at the summit, grew thick. It grew heavy. It began to stink. He smelled it before he saw it. The smell of the Bronze Age. It was the smell of poorly rendered fat, of unburied offal, of stagnant water, of rust, and over it all, the sharp, coppery tang of spilled blood. He set foot on the roads of man. For a time, he just walked. He let the world present itself to him. A chariot, drawn by 4 half-mad horses, thundered down the packed earth road. The driver, a young man with the hard, empty eyes of his generation, saw the old traveller. He did not slow. He did not swerve. He cracked his whip, aiming for the old man's head, laughing as the traveller, with a gasp of effort, stumbled and fell into the thorny ditch. The chariot sped on, its bronze-sheathed wheels crushing the path, leaving the old man choking on a cloud of dust and mockery. Zeus, the king of the gods, lay in the dirt, the sting of thorns in his palms. He felt the humiliation. He felt the casual, effortless cruelty, and the fire inside him, the shielded divinity, grew a fraction of a degree colder. He pulled himself up, his old bones protesting, and continued his journey. He came to a village at dusk. The houses were hovels, built for defence, not comfort. At the village, well, a group of soldiers, their bronze breastplates gleaming dully in the fading light, were shoving a young woman. They kicked over her water pot, watching the precious water sink into the dust. They laughed as she wept, not in malice, but in a profound, terrifying boredom. They were cruel simply because it was something to do. The old traveller approached a house. He saw the flicker of a fire within. He smelled bread, a rare smell in this age. He raised a weak, trembling hand and knocked. The sounds inside stopped. A face appeared in the crack of the door, a hard face. The eyes looked him up and down, saw no wealth, no weapon, no strength, saw only a mouth to feed. The door was slammed in his face. The bolt was shot. Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality, the law that he himself held most dear, the law that bound host and guest in a holy pact. It was not just broken. It was unknown. It was a language no one here spoke. He sat by the side of the road, the cold of the night seeping into his mortal body. He felt hunger, a gnawing, humbling ache. He walked on. He passed a field where, in the moonlight, a group of men were engaged in what looked like a ritual. He saw a makeshift altar. His heart, for a non-second, lifted. Perhaps here. Perhaps piety survived. He drew closer, a humble pilgrim. He saw the carcass of a bull. But the men were not sacrificing. They were cheating. They had wrapped the bones and the gristle in a thick, glistening layer of fat, making it look like a rich offering. This, they were burning on the altar, sending the foul smoke up to the gods. The prime meat, the ribs, the haunches, they were dividing amongst themselves, laughing at their own cleverness. They were mocking the very gods they pretended to worship. The old man turned away. This was not piety. This was a new form of arrogance, a performance of religion, empty of all faith, designed only to satisfy their own cleverness. The fire inside him turned from cold to ice. He needed no more proof. He had seen the road, the village, the altar. He had seen the heart of the Bronze Age. It was hard, it was hollow, and it was rotten. But there was one last stop, one final confirmation. The sickness had a source, a capital. All the rumors he had heard on Olympus, all the whispers of a king who had taken the world's new arrogance and perfected it into a form of art, it all pointed to one place, Arcadia, and to one man, Lycaon. The old traveller set his face toward the kingdom of the wolf. He walked for days, each step a new testament to humanity's fall. He saw no art, he heard no music. He saw only strength preying on weakness, and weakness cowering. Finally, he saw the walls of Lycaon's fortress. They were high, strong, and built not of stone, but of a dark, menacing bronze that seemed to drink the sunlight. He approached the gates. The guards, huge men born of the ash tree, loomed over him. They too laughed. An old beggar. "I seek the hospitality of your king," the old man's voice rasped. One of the guards, perhaps out of some flicker of curiosity, some desire to see what his savage king would do with such a pathetic creature, grunted. The king sees everyone. He is famously hospitable. The great bronze gates groaned open. The old traveller, leaning on his staff, his heart a cold, heavy stone of judgment, walked into the hall of King Lycaon. He walked into the final test. He walked into the room where the fate of the world would be sealed, not by a thunderbolt, but by a meal. The great hall of King Lycaon was a cavern of bronze and smoke. Unlike the marble and light of Olympus, this place was built to intimidate. The very air was heavy. The high, raftered ceiling was lost in a permanent, greasy twilight, thick with the smoke from a dozen fire pits. The walls were not stone, but clad in great, dark bronze plates, polished to a dull sheen, reflecting the firelight like pools of blood. The long tables were scarred with knife marks and dark stains, the benches worn smooth by generations of violent men. The air smelled of roasting meat, of spilled beer, of unwashed bodies, and beneath it all, the sharp, metallic tang of the bronze itself, like old pennies, like old blood. At the head of the fortress, on a throne carved from a single massive piece of blackened ash wood, sat the king, Lycaon. He was a man who personified his age. He was not a brute. He was worse. He was intelligent. His eyes, dark and set deep beneath a heavy brow, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a wolf, an assessing, cold intelligence that weighed everything and valued nothing. He was tall, powerful, his body honed by the very wars he propagated. A dark beard shadowed a mouth that was fixed in a permanent, thin-lipped smile of utter cynicism. He watched the old traveller, this pathetic creature, this piece of human detritus, hobble into his hall. The guards shoved the old man forward, and he stumbled, nearly falling. Laughter, like the barking of dogs, erupted from the tables. Lycaon raised one hand. The hall fell silent. He beckoned the old man forward. They say, Lycaon's voice was surprisingly soft, a smooth, cultured baritone that contrasted sharply with the savagery of his hall. They say a god walks among us. A great god, disguised as this. He gestured to the old man, and the smile on his face widened. They say he has come to test us, to see if we are pious, to see if we are good. The laughter this time was quieter, more cruel. The old traveller, leaning on his staff, his body trembling with a visible, mortal frailty, simply looked at the king. He said nothing. "Are you he?" Lycaon purred. "Are you my father Zeus, come to inspect my kingdom?" The old man's voice was a dry rasp. "I am a traveller. I am hungry. I seek only the shelter of your roof, as is the sacred law." "The sacred law," Lycaon roared. and this time his voice held the full, brutal power of his authority. "Of course, we are famous for our adherence to the sacred law here in Arcadia." He snapped his fingers. "Let us honor this, the guest. Let us honor him as he deserves. Bring him wine, bring him bread, and prepare for him the finest cut." He gave a subtle nod to his eldest sons, men who were shadows of their father, just as cruel but lacking his chilling intellect. They shared a look, a glance of dark, shared understanding. One of them rose and slipped out of the great hall, heading toward the dungeons, or the kitchens. It was unclear which. The old man was given a seat. Wine was poured into a crude pottery cup. It was sour. He drank. Stale bread was thrown onto the table before him. He ate, and he waited. Zeus, inside his shell of frail mortality, waited. He knew what was coming. The threads of fate, the intentions of men, were as clear to him as lines on a map. He knew the test Lycaon had devised, and he let it happen. He let the final, damnable act play itself out. King Lycaon watched him. He spoke to his guest, his voice once again a silky, hospitable murmur. "Tell me, old man, what news from the road? Do the other kingdoms prosper? Do they honor the gods as we do? Do they make fitting sacrifices?" The king's eyes glittered. This was a game, a predator toying with its food. He believed he had all the power. He believed he was the one setting the trap. He was a man who had become so arrogant, so insulated by his own power and the bronze walls he had built, that he genuinely believed he could outwit a god. He believed he could test the divine, and that he, a mortal, could be the one to judge the result. This, Zeus thought, this was the very definition of hubris. This was the sickness in its final, terminal stage. The air in the hall grew thick with anticipation. The men at the tables had stopped their own conversations. They were all watching their king, and the old man, caught in this strange, quiet drama. Then, the doors from the kitchens opened. Two of Lycaon's sons returned. They carried, with a theatrical, mocking reverence, a single platter. It was a heavy bronze tray, polished bright. Upon it, steaming in the smoky air, was a roast. It was small. They set it down before the old traveller. "Our finest," Lycaon said, his smile stretching from ear to ear. "A special offering, prepared, just for you. Please, eat." The old man, Zeus, looked down at the platter. He saw the meat, roasted dark. He saw the small, delicate rib cage. He saw the telltale shape of the joints. He did not need to smell it, though the odour was uniquely, sickeningly sweet. He did not need to taste it. He was the god of all, the father of all. He knew the life that had been in this small body. He knew the child a hostage from a neighbouring tribe, some said, or, as darker rumours whispered, Lycaon's own youngest son, Nyctimus, who had been taken to the block, butchered, and cooked. A test, to see if the god would know. The old man looked up from the platter. He looked at King Lycaon, and that is when the silence fell. It was not a human silence. It was not the mere absence of speech. It was a divine void, a pressure. The great fires in the pits did not just dim, they sputtered. The flames turned a pale, sickly, blue-white, and then shrank, as if gasping for air. The thick smoke in the rafters seemed to freeze, coagulating in the sudden, terrible cold. The boasting, drunken laughter died. The clatter of cups ceased. The very molecules in the air seemed to lock into place. King Lycaon's smile just froze. The confidence on his face did not just fade, it shattered. The predatory gleam in his eyes was replaced by a sudden, dawning, animal terror. He had seen the traveller's eyes. They were no longer the clouded, rheumy eyes of an old man. They were the eyes of the storm. They were two orbs of pure, concentrated lightning, cold and brilliant. The old traveller stood, and the illusion burned away. It was not a transformation. It was a revelation. The ragged clothes, the wrinkled skin, the bent spine, they flaked away like ash, consumed from within by an impossible growing light. The stooped traveller grew, his form unfolding, rising, expanding, until he was no longer a man, but a column of pure, divine energy and muscle. He filled the space. his head brushing the smoky rafters. His presence was a physical weight that forced the men of Arcadia to their knees, their hands over their eyes, screaming. The bronze walls of the hall groaned, the metal plates warping and buckling as if in the presence of an immense, invisible fire. The air itself crackled, smelling of ozone and the impossible freshness of a mountaintop after a storm. Zeus, the king of Olympus, stood in his full, terrible glory. He looked at the cowering, shivering creature that had been King Lycaon, and he spoke. His voice was not a shout. It was the sound of mountains grinding together, the rumble of an avalanche, the crack of a glacier carving into the sea. It was a sound that was not heard with the ears, but felt in the bones. You dare. Lycaon, weeping, tried to form words. A test. Simple. You test me, the voice thundered, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. You whose filth has poisoned the earth. You who are a blasphemy-given flesh. You offer me this abomination. As a jest? Zeus pointed one massive finger at the king. You crave savagery, Lycaon? You wish to be a beast? You wish to feast on flesh and mock the laws of gods and men? Then you shall. He did not cast a thunderbolt. The punishment was far more personal, far more precise. Your outside shall now match your inside forever. Lycaon screamed. It was a human scream, but it began to change. The king fell to his hands and knees, but his body did not just fall. It broke. His joints snapped, his shoulders widening, his hips narrowing. The bones of his hands and feet elongated, cracking and reforming into new shapes. His fine robes tore as his spine arched, his muscles knotting and twisting under his skin. Grey-black fur, coarse and wiry, erupted from his pores. His face, his proud, cynical face, was pushed outward, his jaw unhinged, his teeth falling out as new. Yellow fangs burst from his gums. His ears tore themselves from the side of his head, becoming pointed, tufted, and sharp. His scream became a gurgle, then a snarl, then a long, agonizing, rising howl. It was the first howl, the howl of the first wolf. But the most terrible part was his eyes. They remained human. Trapped inside the bestial, newly formed head was the mind of King Lycaon, the terror, the rage, the awareness. He was still himself, but imprisoned in a form that matched his soul. The creature, the Lycos, driven by a new, burning instinct and an old human terror, fled. It scrambled on four legs, its new claws tearing at the bronze floor. It burst through the doors of its own hall, howling its agony into the night, and vanished into the dark forests of Arcadia. Zeus stood, his light fading slightly. He looked at the cowering, weeping sons of Lycaon. He looked at the men of the Bronze Age, paralyzed in terror. He knew now, beyond all doubt, this was not a king. This was the species. There was no reform. There was no recovery. This world was a failure, and the only thing left to do was to begin the deluge. Olympus was a place of impossible harmony. This was not the harmony of mortals, not the quiet of a forest, nor the gentle music of a lyre. It was the harmony of the spheres, a perfect, interlocking, mathematical resonance of power, light, and divine will. The golden ichor in the god's veins hummed at this frequency. The great, cloud-spun floors of the palace, the impossible architecture of light and air, all vibrated with this perfect, eternal chord. That chord broke. It was not a sound. It was a cessation. A sudden, jarring silence that plunged into the heart of the divine. Hera, in her private chambers, her hand resting on the head of a slumbering peacock, looked up, her regal brow furrowed. The very air had gone sour. The perfect balance of her husband's kingdom felt violated. It felt unclean. In the solar halls, Apollo's lyre string snapped, a thing that had never happened. The note died with a dull, ugly thud. He and his twin, Artemis, looked at each other, their shared, perfect faces shadowed with a sudden, mutual dread. The sun felt too bright, the moon felt too cold. A sickness was breathing from the world below. In the depths, beneath the palace, Hephaestus, the divine smith, felt the fire in his great forge sputter. The pure, white-hot flame of Olympus turned, for a non-second, a greasy, smoky yellow. And far out, at the liquid borders of the kingdom, Poseidon, lord of the sea, who restlessly paced his own watery domain, stopped. He lifted his head. He had felt a vibration through the earth, not a natural quake, but a tremor of abomination, a sin so profound it had shaken the roots of the mountains. And now he felt a new tremor from the throne room of his younger brother, a tremor of absolute, condensed fury. The gods did not need a summons. They were drawn. They were pulled by the vacuum, by the sudden, terrible singularity that had appeared at the center of their universe, the throne of Zeus. They gathered, one by one, emerging from their temples and halls, their divine forms crackling with anxiety. They entered the great audience chamber, and they saw him. Zeus was on his throne, but he was not the Zeus who had left. He was not the old, frail traveler. He was the king of Olympus, yes, but he was stained. He was not covered in mortal blood or dirt. He was stained psychically. He had brought the stench of Arcadia back with him, the greasy smoke of Lycaon's offering, the psychic residue of a soul twisted into a beast, the cold, hollow-eyed arrogance of the Bronze Age. It all clung to him. He sat, not in righteous anger, but in a heavy, cold, and utterly profound disgust. He was silent. His knuckles were white on the armrests of his throne. The master bolt, his symbol of power, lay across his lap, and it was not blazing. It was thrumming. A low, sick, violet-black energy pulsed within it. Hera was the first to speak, her voice clipping the silence. "My lord, what has happened? What is this filth you have brought back to this sacred place?" Zeus did not look at her. He looked past her, through the open-arched walls of the palace, down at the hazy, indistinct blur of the mortal world far, far below. "It is over," he said. His voice was not the thunder. It was the cold stillness of the void. Athena, her grey eyes sharp with a terrible dawning comprehension, stepped forward. "Father, what is over?" "The experiment." Zeus slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes were not the clear blue of the sky. They were the colour of a storm cloud, bruised and boiling. The age of bronze, the race of men. It is a failure, a flaw, a rot, and I have seen the heart of the rot. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembled gods. "Annihilation? All of them?" Hera's voice was sharp, incredulous. "You would destroy everything? My temples? My chosen cities? The bloodlines that trace back to us? Your temples?" Zeus's voice was soft, but it carried the edge of a blade. "Your temples are empty, wife. They are sheds where they cheat us. They perform the motions, but their hearts are full of mockery. They give us the smoke. They give us the bones and the gristle, wrapped in fat to look plump, while they feast on the prime meat and laugh at our gullibility." He was referencing the old sin of Prometheus, the titan who had first tricked him. But now, it was not one trickster. It was the entire species. "They are violent," Ares added, his voice a hopeful, eager growl. He stepped forward, his bronze armor grating. "They are strong. They fight glorious wars. Is that not a form of worship?" "No," Zeus's voice cut him off. "It is not war. It is butchery. There is no glory. There is no honor. There is only the beast. And the beast," his face contorted in a spasm of memory. "The memory of that platter. The beast has forgotten its place." Poseidon, who had been leaning against a great pillar of cloud, now pushed himself upright. He, unlike the others, was not afraid. He was interested. "They are loud," Poseidon said, his voice a deep rumble, like the shifting of the seabed. "Their noise, it vibrates through the earth. It pollutes my waters. They build their little walls, their little dams. They scratch at the earth, thinking they own it. They have forgotten that the land is only a guest in my house. The world is out of balance, brother. It has been for too long." Athena stepped forward again, the personification of wisdom, her face pale but resolute. "Father, you cannot. To destroy an entire race, the innocent with the guilty, this is not justice. This is a tantrum. There must be some good left, some piety. Let us find them." Let us save them. This is not the way of wisdom. Wisdom? Zeus's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He rose from his throne. The thrumming bolt in his hand now flared, and the gods recoiled from the sudden, oppressive wave of divine power. I am wisdom, and I am telling you, I have walked among them. I have offered them the test of Xenia, the most sacred law, and they have failed. I have offered them the test of piety, and they have failed. I have offered them the test of simple decency, and they have failed. And then, his voice dropped, I came to the one who is their king, their exemplar, Lycaon. He did not need to tell them what happened. He was the king of the gods. He showed them. He opened his mind, and he projected the memory into the consciousness of every god in the room. They did not just see it, they tasted it. Hera gagged, her hand flying to her mouth, feeling the psychic imprint of that offering. Apollo turned away, his golden face ashen. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, who knew the clean kill, shuddered at the perversion of the act. They all felt it, the cold, cynical arrogance of Lycaon, the absolute, bottomless depravity of the test, the amusement in his heart as he offered the cooked flesh of a child to a god. The debate was over. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had no words. She too saw the flaw. The flaw was total. The design was broken. It is not a tantrum, Zeus said, his voice now calm, the dreadful calm of a final, irreversible decision. It is surgery. The sickness is total. The patient is the world. He turned. I considered my fire, he mused, looking at his thunderbolt. I considered burning them, a rain of fire from the heavens, but their sin is so great, I fear the flames would leap too high. The conflagration might catch the axle of the heavens. It might burn us. He paused, a new, terrible idea forming. No, fire is pure. It is a divine element. They are not worthy of it. He looked at his brother, Poseidon. The lord of the sea met his gaze, and for the first time in centuries, a slow, terrible, and eager smile spread across his face. He understood. Their sin is a filth, Zeus declared, and filth must be washed away. It must be dissolved, returned to the primordial state. He turned to the divine assembly. We will begin again, or perhaps we will not. But this ends. Now. He raised his hand. Lock away the winds, all of them, Boreas, Zephyrus, Eurus. Lock them in the caves of Aeolus, all but one. He turned his gaze to the south. Release Notus, the south wind. Let him gather every cloud, every wisp of vapor, from every corner of the world, and tell him to wring them dry. He pointed to his brother, Poseidon. Your realm has been caged for too long. I am unmaking the boundaries. Call your rivers, call your streams, call the deep abyssal waters. I want you to let go. The council was over. The verdict was given. The gods dispersed in a shocked, awed silence. There was nothing left to say. There was only the gathering of the clouds, and the silence, the deep, heavy, wet silence, before the first drop of rain. The world was a scream. The verdict had been passed in heaven, but on earth, the noise continued, blissfully unaware. It was the sound of 100,000 forges clanging bronze into spear points. It was the sound of chariot wheels vibrating on the hard-packed earth. It was the sound of cities not in celebration but in a constant, low-grade clamour of aggression, of drunken boasts, of shouted commands. This was the soundtrack of the Bronze Age, and to the gods on Olympus, looking down, this deafening singular roar of violence was all that was left. The entire species had become a single, monstrous entity, a collective shouting its own name to the sky, daring the heavens to respond. When Zeus, in his disgust, condemned the world, he condemned this sound. He condemned the whole. In the grand, sweeping, divine perspective, there was no difference between one man and the next. They were all part of the rot. The sickness was uniform. But the gaze of a god, even an all-seeing one, has its flaws. It is drawn to the spectacular. It is drawn to the loud. It is drawn to the great, smoking cities and the blasphemous kings. It overlooks the quiet. It misses the spaces in between the noise. Let us pull our focus away from the divine. Let us zoom past the throne of Zeus, past the gathering, pregnant, black-bellied clouds of the south wind. Let us descend, past the mountain peaks, past the warring armies of Arcadia, past the smoking altars of cheats. Let us go to Phia, in Thessaly. Let us find a small valley, nestled between hills, a place of no strategic importance. There are no bronze walls here. There is no fortress. There is only a small, simple house of stone and wood, set by a stream. The air here is quiet. The sound is not the clang of bronze. It is the shush, shush of a knife carving wood. Inside this house lives a man. His name is Deucalion. He is not like the men of his age. He is not immense. He is not hard of heart. He is thoughtful. He sits by a low fire, his hands, calloused but careful, working a piece of yew. He is carving a new axle for a cart. It is a work of creation, a work of maintenance. In a world that only knows how to break, Deucalion knows how to make. There is a shadow in his eyes. He is the son of Prometheus. Think what this means. He is the son of the Titan who remembers the Golden Age. He is the son of the Titan who saw the flaws in Zeus's new order. He is the son of the being who, in an act of defiant compassion, stole fire for mankind, knowing the terrible, eternal price. Deucalion did not inherit his father's immortality. He did not inherit his divine power, but he inherited something far more burdensome, his father's foresight. Deucalion looks at the world, and he sees it. He is not blinded by the bronze madness. He sees the sickness. He sees the hubris. He sees the casual cruelty of the men around him, and it fills him not with rage, but with a deep, profound, and gnawing anxiety. He sees the storm clouds gathering, even when the sky is clear. He is a man who worries. He is a man who fears the gods, not with the cowering terror of a slave, but with the respectful awe of a man who understands consequence. He is, in this age of roaring arrogance, the only man who is truly afraid. And in the other room, there is another sound. It is the sound of stone grinding on stone. A woman is grinding grain. This, in itself, is an act of defiance. The Bronze Age, the poet said, ate no bread. They were hunters and butchers. But here, there is wheat, there is barley. There is the simple, civilized, sacred act of making flour. This is Pyrrha. She is Deucalion's wife, and his cousin, and her lineage is just as profound. She is the daughter of Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, the afterthinker, the one who accepted the gods' gifts without question, and her mother was Pandora, the first woman, the one crafted by all the gods as a test, a punishment, a beautiful evil, the one who was given the pithos, the jar, and told not to open it, the one whose curiosity unleashed upon the world all of its miseries, sickness, old age, jealousy, war, toil, all the ingredients of the Bronze Age. But when Pandora shut the lid, one thing, and one thing only, remained trapped inside. Elpis, hope. Pyrrha is the daughter of hope. She is the living, breathing embodiment of the one thing humanity did not lose. If Deucalion is the anxiety of foresight, Pyrrha is the resilience of hope. She is the red-haired, clear-eyed counterweight to his sorrow. Where he sees the coming storm, she sees the simple, necessary work of today. She grinds the grain. She tends the fire. She makes the proper offerings to the gods, not in fear, but in genuine, simple piety. They are a perfect, quiet whole. He, the son of the mind. She, the daughter of the heart. They are the last house on earth where Xenia is still practiced. A traveller at their door would be given the best chair, the first cup of wine, the last of their bread. They are the last altar where sacrifices are made correctly. They burn the best parts for the gods and eat the rest with humble gratitude. They are, in essence, an anachronism. They are a small, fragile pocket of the Golden Age that has somehow miraculously survived the rot of the bronze. They are two small, flickering candle flames in a world that has become a raging, mindless wildfire, and the gods, in their sweeping, generalizing fury, have missed them. Zeus, in his disgust, has painted the entire canvas black. He has given the order, The south wind is gathering its breath. Poseidon is placing his hands on the boundaries of the world, preparing to shove. The sky is clear over Thea. Deucalion, his carving finished, looks out the door. He feels that familiar, nameless anxiety prickle his skin. He looks at the clear blue sky, and he does not trust it. Pyrrha comes to his side, wiping flour from her hands. She sees the worry in his face. She puts her hand on his arm. She does not need to speak. She is Olympus. She is hope. They are two people, two quiet, good, and righteous people, and they have just been condemned to die with all the rest. They are unaware that the mechanism of total annihilation has been set in motion. They are unaware that they are the only thing left worth saving. And Zeus, in his anger, has forgotten them. But, high on a frozen peak in the Caucasus, chained to a rock, with an eagle tearing at his immortal liver, their father has not. Prometheus, the one who sees all futures, has not forgotten his son. The mountain was a spike of iron-hard ice, driven into the roof of the world. Here, at the absolute limit of things, in the frozen wasteland of the Caucasus, there was no life. There was only the wind. It was a wind that did not just blow, it scoured. It was a wind that had not stopped for millennia, and it carried in it the memory of the world's first agonizing cold. And on that peak, there was a figure. He was chained. His chains were not mere iron. They were adamantine, the same unbreakable, unfeeling substance that formed the hearts of the Bronze Age men. They were forged by Hephaestus, and they were unbreakable. This was Prometheus, the Titan, the forethinker, the one who had seen. His body was a map of old and new agonies. By day, he baked under a sun that was not warm, but a burning, hateful eye. By night, he froze, the ice cracking his immortal skin, the wind flaying him. And every morning, it came. He heard it before he saw it, a great, dark beating of wings that seemed to push the very air aside. The shadow would fall over him, a moment of blessed, terrible relief from the Sunday. And then the eagle, the winged hound of Zeus, would land. It would land upon his chest. Its talons, hard as bronze, would grip his ribs. It would look at him, its eyes holding a cold, impersonal divine hunger. And then it would begin to feed. The pain was absolute. It was the pain of being eaten alive, a pain that should have killed him in a second, but he could not die. The eagle's beak was a surgical instrument of torture, tearing through skin and sinew to find the prize, his liver. It would tear the organ out, piece by bloody piece. And every night, his immortal flesh, his divine organ, would regrow just to be ready for the morning. This was his punishment for loving humanity. This was his price for the gift of fire. But the chains, the cold, the eagle, they were not the worst of his torment. The worst part was his gift. He could see. His foresight was not a gentle vision. It was a torrent. He was chained to a rock, but his mind was unbound, and it was forced to watch every future, every possibility, every consequence, spooling out before him like a million unraveling threads. He saw the rise and fall of empires that were not yet dust. He heard the cries of children not yet born. He saw the inevitable, tragic, bloody arc of human history, the very history he had tried to help. It was a torment of perfect, agonizing clarity. And on this day, as the wind screamed and the ice held him fast, he saw something new. He saw a shadow fall over all the threads of the future. He did, to just see it. He felt it. He felt the shift on Olympus. He did not need to be in the throne room. He heard the terrible, cold silence of his cousin, Zeus. He felt the psychic stain of Arcadia. He tasted the abomination of Lycaon's feast. He saw the council. He heard the verdict. Wash it away. He saw the locks on the wind caves opening. He saw the south wind, Notus, released, a joyful, dark, wet entity. He saw his other cousin, Poseidon, his hand on the deep-rooted foundations of the land, smiling. The flood was not a possibility. It was a mechanism that had already been engaged. The gears were turning. Prometheus let out a roar. It was a sound that was not a sound, a psychic scream of pure, absolute despair. He had not endured millennia of torture just for it all to be erased. Not for his creation, his flawed, beautiful, struggling humanity, to be wiped out by the cold whim of an angry king. His mind, his unbound foresight, began to search. It tore through the world, past the screaming, bronze-mad cities. He did not care about them. They were the disease. He was looking. He was looking for the quiet. He was looking for the house in Phthia. He was looking for his son. His mind, a comet of pure thought, found him. Deucalion. He saw him. He saw him mending a fence. He saw him look up at the perfectly blue, clear sky and shiver. He saw the anxiety, the foresight that he had passed down to his mortal son. He saw Pyrrha, the daughter of hope, turning grain. They are good, he thought. They are the only ones. They are the seed. He had to warn him. But how? He was chained. He had no voice. He had no messenger. He had only his mind and his pain. The eagle was gone. The sun was setting. His liver was already knitting itself back together. A dull, hot, itching process. He would use the pain. Prometheus closed his immortal eyes. He gathered all of his will, all of his defiance, all of his terrible, enduring love. He focused it, past the cold, past the chains, past the agony of his regenerating flesh. He focused it into a single, desperate, burning point of thought. He pushed it across the world. In Phthia, Deucalion sat up from his work, a sudden cold sweat on his brow. The sky was still blue. The air was still calm. But a new, specific terror had just seized his heart. He stumbled into the house, his face pale. "What is it?" Pyrrha asked, her hands white with flour. "A dream," Deucalion stammered. "But I am awake." He clutched his head. It was not a voice. It was a knowledge. A set of images, brutal and clear, had just been hammered into his mind. He saw a mountain of water. He saw the world, the entire world, sinking beneath a black, raging sea. He saw the face of Zeus, cold and full of judgment. He saw the god Poseidon, his trident raised. He saw rain, a rain that was not rain, a solid wall of water that fell for days, for 9 days. And then he saw an instruction, not a command, but a blueprint. An image burned into his forememory, a box. Not a great ship with sails and a rudder, not an ark to steer. The vision was specific, a larnax, a great wooden chest. He saw the joints. He saw the need for pitch to seal every crack. He saw himself inside with Pyrrha. He saw that there was no need to steer, because there would be nowhere to steer. "What did you see?" Pyrrha asked, her voice trembling. Deucalion looked at his wife, his eyes wide with the terrible divine clarity that had been forced into him. "The end," he whispered. Father has shown me the end." He grabbed his axe. "We have no time. We must find the oldest, strongest trees. We are not building a boat, we are building a box, a chest to hold the last of the world." Pyrrha, the daughter of hope, did not question him. She too had felt it. A sudden cold wind that seemed to blow from nowhere, a shadow that had fallen from a clear blue sky. She nodded. "I will gather the food, the grain, the water." They began to work. High on the mountain, Prometheus slumped against his chains. The effort had been immense. It had cost him. He felt the first, faint stirring of the south wind, even here, at the top of the world. It was a warm, wet breath, full of the salt of distant, rising seas. He had done it. He had cast his last, defiant vote. He looked up, toward the heavens. "You will not have them all," he whispered to the wind. "You will not win. Not completely." He closed his eyes and waited for the dawn and for the eagle. It did not begin with a sound. It began with a silence, a profound, unnatural and global cessation. First, the winds of the world, which had blown since the beginning of time, stopped. The restless breezes of the Aegean, the dry sirocco from the south, the cold breath of Boreas from Thrace, all of it ceased. The world held its breath. On the sea, the great bronze-prowed ships of the Bronze Age warriors, heavy with plunder, lay suddenly becalmed. The sails flapped once, twice, and then hung as limp and useless as dead things. The water, usually a vibrant wine-dark blue, turned a flat, oily, metallic grey. In the forests, the leaves of the ash trees, the very trees from which this violent race had been born, stopped rustling. The birds, the insects, the entire thrumming symphony of life went utterly quiet. In the bronze-walled cities, the smoke from the 1,000 forges, which had never stopped day or night, no longer billowed and swirled. It rose in a single, thick, greasy black column, straight into the air, as if it were a solid pillar holding up the sky. The men of the Bronze Age, their hammers stilled in their hands, looked up. They were not creatures of introspection. They did not understand omens, but they understood interruption. And this was an interruption. This profound, oppressive quiet made their hard, adamant hearts uneasy. The silence was an enemy they could not strike. Then came the smell. It was not the familiar smell of the forge, of sweat, of blood, of roasting meat. It was a smell they had never encountered. It was the smell of a dry, hot stone just before a lightning strike, an electric ozone tang. But beneath that, something else. The smell of dust. The smell of a tomb, vast and ancient, that had just been unsealed. And then, in the prison of the winds, the order was given. Aeolus, the keeper, his face grim, drew the bolts on the great cave. The winds of the west, north, and east huddled back, whimpering, but one he unleashed. Notus, the south wind. Notus was not a gentle breeze. He was a being, a wet, heavy, ancient god, his great wings so saturated with moisture they could barely beat. His long beard was a torrent of ice-cold rain, his breath a rolling fog. He was the wet nurse of the storm, and he flew forth, not with speed, but with a terrible, lumbering weight. He flew across the world, and as he went, he gathered. He was a shepherd, and his flock was the clouds. He gathered the high, wispy mares' tails. He gathered the fluffy, fair-weather cumulus. He gathered the dark, brooding banks of fog from the sea. He pulled them all into one, single, roiling, monstrous flock that covered the world from horizon to horizon. The sky vanished. It was replaced by a ceiling of such oppressive, dark, bruised green-black that it seemed to lower itself, foot by foot, until it was barely above the heads of men. The sun was not just blocked, it was devoured. The world was plunged into a half-light, a cold, damp, electric twilight at midday. In Phthia, Deucalion and Pyrrha had finished. The Larnax was done. It was not beautiful. It was a box. It was a massive chest of cypress and pine, its every joint and crack plugged and smeared with thick black pitch. It sat on the ground, stark and alien, smelling of resin and terror. They had gathered what they could. Sacks of the grain Pyrrha had ground, skins of water, a few tools. They had made their final, small, desperate sacrifice to Zeus, the one who was about to kill them. It was not a plea, it was an act of piety, performed even in the face of annihilation. "It is time," Deucalion said, his voice a dry croak. He looked at his wife, her red hair matted with sweat and pitch. Pyrrha, the daughter of Hope, looked ashen, but she nodded. He put his hand on the heavy, pitched lid. In the bronze-walled city, the men were still looking up. The uneasy silence had given way to an angry muttering. This darkness, this cold, this smell. It was an inconvenience. It was an insult. A few of them, drunk on the arrogance of their age, shook their bronze-tipped spears at the bruised, sagging sky. They cursed at the air. They dared the storm, whatever it was, to challenge them. And the sky obliged. The first drop was not a drop. It was a thud. A single heavy weight of water, the size of a man's fist, struck the packed earth in the center of the city square. It was not clear. It was a dark, briny, ice-cold thing. It left a crater in the dust. A moment of shocked silence. Thud. Another. Thud. 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 They began to fall faster. Not as rain, but as a pelting. A stoning. It was as if the sky was throwing cold, heavy pebbles of water. The men who had been shaking their spears lowered them. a new cold feeling searing their hearts. It was not awe, it was not piety, it was the first unfamiliar pinprick of fear. In fear, Deucalion and Pyrrha scrambled into the Larnax. The cold, heavy drops were already hammering on the wooden frame. It sounded like fists. "Now!" Deucalion yelled. They crouched inside, in the dark, resine-smelling confinement. Together, they reached up and pulled the massive, heavy lid down. It seated itself with a thick, final thoom. Deucalion fumbled for the crossbar, sliding it into place from the inside. They were sealed. They were in a wooden coffin, in the middle of a field. And then, the sky tore open. The silence was replaced by a sound that the world had never heard. It was not the patter of a storm. It was not the roar of a waterfall. It was the sound of the entire ocean, inverted and falling upwards, and then down. It was the sound of Notus, the great south wind, ringing out the sky. It was a solid, unbroken, deafening wall of water. It was not rain. It was a deluge, a falling ocean. Inside the chest, the sound was absolute. It was a drumbeat so loud, so constant, so all-consuming that it erased thought. It was the sound of 1,000,000 hammers striking every inch of their wooden shell, all at once, without pause. Deucalion and Pyrrha huddled together, their eyes wide with terror in the absolute dark, unable to even hear their own screams. Outside, in the bronze city, the men who had been standing in the square were gone. The first impact of that solid wall of water had not just wet them, it had hit them. It had the weight of a falling building. It knocked them from their feet, smashed them against their own bronze walls. The water was ice cold. It stole the breath. It was not fresh. It tasted of salt, of the deep, cold, primordial sea. Within 60 seconds, the water was not at their ankles. It was at their knees. The rain did not stop. It did not lessen. It was a constant, heavy, crushing force. The men of the Bronze Age, the men of adamant hearts, finally began to scream. They scrambled for high ground. They tried to climb their own unfeeling walls, but the rain was so heavy it beat them down. The water in the city square was at their chests, and as they choked on the water falling from the sky, as they were beaten down by this impossible, vertical flood, one of them, his eyes wide with a madness that was beyond even the madness of his age, looked at the river, the great river that ran beside their city. He pointed, a soundless scream tearing his throat. The river had stopped flowing to the sea. Under the ungodly pressure of the falling sky, the river had begun to boil, and then, slowly, impossibly, it began to flow backwards. The rain from above was an execution, but it was only the beginning. The true terror, the true end, was now crawling up from the earth itself. He had been waiting. In the crushing, absolute, and silent dark of the deepest trenches, where the pressure was so great it was a solid thing, Poseidon had been listening. He was the elder. He was the earth-shaker. While his younger brother Zeus ruled the thin, fickle, and noisy realm of the air, he, Poseidon, held the true power. He was the world. His veins were the silver of the deep-running ore. His bones were the granite foundations of the continents. His blood was the vast, cold, and dominant ocean that covered 3/4 of the globe, and his patience was as deep as his domain. But for an age, he had been irritated. He had felt the Bronze Age not as a visual, as Zeus had, but as a vibration, a physical, unending, and agonizing itch. He had felt the clang, clang, clang of their 10,000 forges, a high-pitched, metallic screaming that vibrated down through the bedrock, a constant migraine in his skull. He had felt the thud, thud, thud of their marching armies, an arrogant, pointless tremor across the skin of the land. He had felt their cities, their bronze-walled fortresses. They were like splinters, like abscesses, festering hot, infected points on the surface of the earth. And most of all, he had tasted them, the rivers, the Potamoi, his subjects. His children, who were supposed to run clean and pure to his sea, had become sluggish. They ran thick, they ran hot, they ran with the taint of offal, the chemical sting of their forges, and the constant, coppery, nauseating taste of blood. He had waited. He had respected the boundaries. the lines drawn after the Great War with the Titans, the compact that separated the sky, the sea, and the underworld. But he had heard the verdict from Olympus. He had felt his brother's cold, final disgust. He had felt the locking of the winds. He had felt the release of Notus. And now, he felt the first part of the assault. He felt the weight of the sky, the rain, the solid billion-ton, crushing hammer of Zeus's rage, pounding on the surface of his oceans. It was a signal. It was a drumbeat. It was an invitation. It was permission. Deep in the blackness, a smile, vast and terrible, spread across the Earthshaker's face. The wait was over. He did not rise. Not yet. First, he would unmake. He flexed. It was a movement as subtle and as all-encompassing as a giant shifting in his sleep. It was a clenching of the planet's deepest muscles. On the surface, the world broke. This was the first act of his wrath. The rain was from Zeus. The earthquake was from him. The ground did not just tremble. It tore. In Arcadia, the bronze-walled fortress of Lycaon, which had already been shattered by Zeus's lightning, was not just broken. It was swallowed. The earth, with a wet, sucking, grinding sound, simply opened up and took the fortress back. A foul taste it was spitting into the abyss. Mountains, which had stood since the world was young, shuddered. Great fissures, miles long, ripped across the valleys. The men of the Bronze Age, already choking on the solid rain, now found the very ground beneath their feet betraying them. It was no longer solid. It was a liquid thing. It was a trap door. They fell screaming into the earth's new torn wounds. This was the Shaker. But he was also the Lord of the Waters, and his assault was not just from the sea, it was from within. He turned his immense cold consciousness to the rivers, the Potamoi. The rain was hammering down, a vertical ocean. The rivers, fat and swollen, were trying to do their duty. They were trying to run to the sea. But how could they? The sea was not receiving. The sea was pushing back. The river gods cried out in confusion. They were being beaten from the sky and blocked by the ocean. They were choked. Poseidon gave the command. It was not a word. It was a sudden, terrible reversal of pressure. Turn. And all at once, every river, every stream, every brook on the face of the world stopped. The men of the Bronze Age, huddled on the diminishing hills, saw it. The great, raging rivers, their last hope of drainage, paused. They boiled. They churned in place. And then, as one, they began to flow backwards. They flowed inland. The water, which had been a plague from the sky, now became a monster rising from the earth. It was not just rain. It was a betrayal from the planet itself. The familiar, life-giving rivers became salt-choked, raging serpents, exploding from their banks and racing up the hills, devouring the very land that had given them their beds. The world was being attacked from the sky. It was being attacked from below. And now, it was being attacked from within. And still, Poseidon had not moved. That was all just a stretching, a preparation. Now, it was time for the final act. He rose. From the crushing blackness of the trench, he rose. Up, up, through the miles of cold, dark water. He rose, a column of divine, raw, liquid power. He burst through the surface of his own ocean, in the center of a storm so vast it had no eye. The rain of Zeus hammered his broad shoulders. He did not care. He tasted the air. It was clean of men. It was pure. He raised his hand, and into it, coalescing from the storm and the sea spray, came his trident. It was not a weapon. It was a key, a tool for tuning the world, a divine instrument that could unmake the foundations. He did not strike the land. He struck the boundaries. He plunged the tines of the great fork down, not into the earth, but into the concept of the coastline. He struck the idea of a beach. He struck the law that said here, the sea must stop. And he pulled. The sound was not a sound. It was the planet screaming. It was the sound of the oldest pact being broken. And the ocean let go. It was not a wave. A tsunami is a wave. This was a release. The sea, all at once, stood up. A wall of black, solid water, a mile high. rising from every horizon. It was not a wave that would crash. It was a wall that would advance. The rain was still falling, a relentless, vertical hammer. But this new thing, this thing of Poseidon's, was a horizontal, crushing, erasing force. The last of the Bronze Age men, the few who had survived the quakes and the backward-running rivers, who were clinging to the highest peaks of the mountains, they had one last, terrible moment. They saw it. They saw the ocean, which had always been down there, now up here. It was a new, black sky in the west, a solid, moving mountain range of water that blotted out the remaining light. It did not crash. It simply arrived. It was the cold, primordial, final hand of the sea, reaching across the entire world and wiping the slate clean. It did not drown them. It erased them. It scoured the mountains bare, ripping the forests, the soil, the very stone from the bones of the earth. The bronze cities were not just flooded. They were polymolished, their bronze plates scoured and scattered, their foundations rubbed away to nothing. Inside their small wooden pitching spinning chest, Deucalion and Pyrrha heard it. The sound changed. The constant deafening hammer of the rain was joined by a new sound, a low, grinding, tearing roar that was felt more than heard. It was the sound of the world being sanded. The reign of Zeus was the deluge. The wrath of Poseidon was the annihilation. There was no more land. There was no more sea. There was no more sky. There was only one, single, unified, boiling, lightless, grey and wrathful ocean. The world had been returned to the primordial soup. Zeus had passed the judgment. But Poseidon had carried out the execution. There was no after. The after implies that the before has simply stopped. But the event did not stop. The tearing, grinding, annihilating roar of Poseidon's ocean wall and the vertical hammering deluge of Zeus's sky. This was not an event. It was the new state of the world. Inside the Larnax, there was no thought. There was no prayer. There was only sensation. It was the sensation of being inside a drum, while a million giants beat upon it. It was the sensation of tumbling end over end, sideways, a feeling of profound, nauseating, directionless motion. The chest, which had been a box, was now a speck, a piece of driftwood in a blender the size of the planet. Deucalion and Pyrrha did not huddle. They were thrown. They were bruised against the hard, pitch-sealed wood. They were a pair of dice in a cup, shaken by a wrathful and infinite hand. This was the first day. Or perhaps it was the second. Time had broken. In the absolute, pressing, and total darkness of the chest, time was no longer measured by the Sunday. It was measured only by the intensity of the sound. At first, the sound was the grinding. It was the sound of mountains being sanded flat, of forests being pulped, of bronze cities being scoured from the rock. Then, perhaps on the third day, the grinding began to fade. It was replaced by a new sound, a sound that was, in its own way, more terrible. It was the slosh, a great, deep, cosmic sloshing. It was the sound of a global, united, and victorious ocean, settling over its new conquest. The world was dead. The water had won. And this was the sound of its quiet, absolute reign. The Larnax was no longer tumbling. It was drifting. The rain, the hammer of Zeus, had finally lessened. It was no longer a solid wall, but a dense, steady, hissing. The great assault was over. The occupation had begun. Deucalion and Pyrrha found each other in the dark. Their hands, fumbling, met. They were both soaked. Not from leaks the chest was sound, a testament to Prometheus's vision, but from the cold. The cold was a living thing. It was the deep, abyssal cold of Poseidon's trenches, now brought to the surface. It was the cold of a world without a Sunday. The wood of the chest wept with a freezing condensation, and their own breath plumed in the blackness, a blackness so complete it was a pressure against their eyeballs. "I am here," Pyrrha whispered. Her voice was a dry, small, alien sound in the vast, wet roar. "I am here," Deucalion replied, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. That was the fourth day. They were alive, but they were not survivors. They were witnesses. They were the sole audience to an execution they had, by some miracle, been allowed to attend. The psychological torment began. The darkness was a void. It began to eat their senses. They would lift a hand, a mere inch from their face, and it was not there. They were not there. They were just two consciousnesses, 2 points of cold terror, floating in a box, in a void. They tried to measure time. Deucalion, the forethinker, tried to impose order. "We will eat now," he would say. And Pyrrha, the daughter of hope, would fumble for the sack of grain. In the total dark, she would portion out a small, wet handful of barley. They would chew the hard, raw kernels, the sound of their own chewing deafening, obscene, in the small, dark space. They would take one sip of water from the skin. It was stale. It tasted of pitch. It was the most precious thing in the universe. That was the 5th day. The smell was overwhelming. The sharp, clean, resinous tang of the pine and the pitch was now mixed with the sour, human smell of their own unwashed bodies, of stale air, of fear. They stopped speaking. What was there to say? Every word was a reminder of the world they had lost. Every memory was a fresh agony. To speak of the sun was a blasphemy. To speak of their home, their valley in Phthia, was to invite a madness they could not afford. So they sat in silence, back to back for warmth. Their only reality was the cold, the dark, the damp wood, and the eternal horrible sloshing of the dead world's ocean outside. This was the 6th day, and the 7th. By the 8th day, a new terror had set in, a deeper, philosophical dread. Deucalion, the son of the one who sees, could not see. He was blind. His gift was useless. He began to wonder if this was the true punishment. Not death, but this, to be forgotten, to be left in a box, to drift forever on a lightless, featureless sea, until their food ran out, until their minds broke, until they died in this small, dark, floating coffin. He wondered if Zeus, in his rage, had even remembered to save them, or if this too was part of his father's desperate, failed gamble. He felt Pyrrha shiver against him. He felt her hand find his. She did not speak. She just held on. Elpis. Hope. It was not a grand thing. It was not a glorious, shining light. It was this. The simple, stubborn, animal refusal to let go. The act of holding a hand in a darkness that had consumed the world. This was the 9th day. The silence. The cold. The dark. The slosh. And then, a new sound. It was not a sound from the sky. It was not a sound from the water. It was a sound from below. It was a slow, heavy, scraping, grinding noise. Thud. The Larnax, which had known nothing but the motion of water for 9 eternities, stopped. It jolted, throwing them forward. It did not just stop. It settled. It tilted, resting at an angle on something that was not liquid, something that was solid. After 9 days and 9 nights adrift on the new face of the planet, their tiny wooden universe had just run aground. The thud was final. It was not a crash. It was not another jolt in a 9-day symphony of jolts. It was a stop, a heavy, solid, and utterly definitive cessation of movement. Inside the total resin-scented blackness, Deucalion and Pyrrha were thrown forward one last time. They landed in a heap against the forward wall of the chest, their bones bruised, their hearts hammering. And then, silence. The slosh was gone. The eternal, grinding sloshing of the dead world's ocean, which had been their only reality, had ceased. The rain, the billion-fingered drumbeat on the roof, was gone. The only sound was the harsh, ragged rasp of their own breathing in the stale, cold air, and the frantic, terrified pounding of their own blood in their ears. They waited. They did not speak. They did not move. They just waited. In the dark, the Larnax was tilted, resting at a sharp, uncomfortable angle. They were huddled in the down corner, the small pool of sloshed bilge water and their own filth cold against their skin. How long did they wait? A minute? An hour? Another day? Time, in the box, had died. The silence outside was worse than the noise had been. The noise was chaos. It was fury. It was something. The silence was nothing. It was the sound of an ended world, the sound of a completed execution. It was the silence of the grave, and they were in a coffin, and the coffin had just been set down. Deucalion? Pyrrha's voice was a dead thing, a dry crackle of sound. I am here. It has stopped. Yes, Deucalion, the man of foresight, felt his way in the blackness. His trembling fingers found the great wooden crossbar that sealed the lid from within. His hand rested on it, and he did nothing. He was terrified. He was terrified to open it. For 9 days, this box had been their universe. It had been their shield. It had been their life. Outside was the wrath of Zeus. Outside was the fury of Poseidon. What if the water had not receded? What if they had merely landed on a false peak, a submerged mountaintop, and opening the lid would invite the very ocean they had, for 9 days, miraculously denied? What if the air itself was poison? What if the world was now just a void, a mist, and to open the lid was to simply dissolve? As long as the lid was closed, they were the last of humanity. The moment they opened it, they might discover that they, too, were dead. It was Pyrrha, the daughter of Pandora, the daughter of Hope, who found his hand in the darkness. Her own hand was ice-cold, shaking, but her grip was firm. "We must," she whispered. "We cannot die in the dark. We must see." He nodded, a gesture she could not see but could feel. He took a breath. The air was sour, thin. He put his shoulder to the great crossbar and pushed. It did not budge. The wood was swollen. The pitch was sealed. It was 9 days of pressure, of cold, of sea salt, locking them in. Together, he grunted. They positioned themselves beneath it, in the cramped, tilted blackness. They pushed with their legs, with their shoulders, with the last, desperate, famished dregs of their strength. There was a scream, a high, tearing wooden shriek as the pitch seal broke. And then, a crack. A single horizontal line of light cut the darkness. It was not a warm, golden, hopeful light. It was a grey light, a watery, sickly, hostile light. And to their eyes, which had known only absolute blackness for 9 days, it was a physical assault. It was a blade. It was a fire. They both cried out, shielding their faces, tears of pure, reflexive agony streaming down their cheeks. They were blind. The new world's first gift was pain. Slowly, agonizingly, they pushed again. The lid, heavy with 9 days of rain, groaned. It lifted. It opened. The grey light flooded in. The smell hit them first. It was not the clean, resinous smell of their box. It was not the salt spray of the sea. It was the smell of a tomb the size of the world. It was the smell of rot, a deep, pervasive, bottom-of-the-ocean stench of a billion things, plants, animals, people decaying at once. It was the smell of brine and of mud, a thick, sulphuric, ancient stench of a world's grave. They gagged, their empty stomachs heaving. When their eyes finally adjusted, blinking through the tears, they saw each other. They were not people. They were ghosts. They were pale, gaunt, smeared with filth and black pitch, their hair matted, their eyes wide and black in their shrunken faces. They were 2 feral creatures, crawled out of a hole. And then they looked out. They were high, impossibly high. The Larnax had come to rest on a slick, grey, glistening slab of rock, and all around them was nothing. The world was gone. There was no green, there was no blue, there was only grey. As far as the eye could see, in every direction was an ocean, not of water, but of mud, a vast, limitless, viscous, grey slime. The ocean of Poseidon had receded, but this is what it had left behind. Its mark, its filth. The sky was not a sky. It was a low, heavy, bruised, purple-grey ceiling that seemed to touch the horizon. The sun was not a Sunday. It was a pale, white, sickly stain behind the wet clouds, giving off a light that held no warmth. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind, no rustle of leaves. The only sound was a distant, wet, gurgling, a sucking sound. It was the sound of the last of the floodwaters, draining away down the slopes of the world, pulling at the new, thick mud. Drip, drip, drip. Water fell from the sagging, weeping clouds. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, son of Foresight, stepped out. His foot sank to the ankle in the cold, primordial ooze. This was Parnassus, the sacred mountain, the twin-peaked home of the Muses, the Omphalos, the navel of the world. It was the one place the flood had not quite conquered. The waters had lapped at its summit, and now receded, leaving them here. They stood, two tiny shivering figures on a rock, in a universe of grey mud, under a hostile, weeping sky. They had survived. This was survival. And as the full, cosmic and absolute loneliness of the new world settled upon them, Pyrrha, the daughter of Hope, finally put her hands to her face, and she began to weep. She did not weep for joy. She wept for the silence. She wept for the grey. She wept for the billions lost. Deucalion looked out at the desolation. His father, Prometheus, had shown him the flood, but he had never shown him this, the after, the cold, silent, empty, and terrible bill for their survival. They were the last two people alive, and the world they had inherited was a grave. Pyrrha's weeping was the only sound in the universe. It was a raw, thin animal sound that cut through the profound grey silence. It was the sound of a heart breaking, not in passion, but in sheer, absolute loneliness. She wept for the green of the grass, for the memory of a bird's song, for the faces of her parents, for the billions of souls now dissolved into the grey, stinking ooze that covered the world. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, stood beside her. He did not comfort her. What comfort was there? He, the man of foresight, had been shown the flood, but his father, in all his terrible wisdom, had neglected to show him this, the after, the cold, silent, empty, and terrible bill for their survival. This was not a world. It was a receipt. When Pyrrha's weeping finally choked itself into a dry, gasping silence, the true silence rushed back in. It was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. A thick, heavy, cold blanket of nothing that pressed against their eardrums. It was the sound of a vacuum, the sound of a world-sized grave. They did not speak. For how long? A day? 2? Time had died with the Sunday. They huddled by the Larnax, their wooden womb, their coffin ship. It was the only thing in this new universe that smelled of their old world, the sharp, clean tang of pitch and pine. Everything else was the stench of the mud. It was the smell of a billion things dying all at once. It was the smell of the Bronze Age, of its wars, its cities, its people, its animals, its forests, all liquefied, churned, and reduced to a single planet-wide grey slurry. They were not heroes. They were not founders. They were two traumatized animals, cowering on a rock in a graveyard. It was thirst that finally drove them. The animal need. Their water skins were empty. Deucalion, his movements stiff, his joints aching with the abyssal cold, stood. His eyes were hollow. "We must move," he whispered. His voice was alien, a dry crackle. Pyrrha, her red hair matted with grey slime, her face a mask of dried tears, looked at him, her eyes vacant. But she was the daughter of Hope. It was not a grand, glorious hope. It was a stubborn, animal instinct. She nodded. The descent from the peak of Parnassus was not a walk. It was a second ordeal. The world was not solid. It was a treacherous, near-vertical landscape of this new grey ooze. It was slick, it was deep, and it was cold. Every step was a gamble. They slipped. They fell. They were covered in the grey, stinking remnants of the old world. They were being baptized in the planet's grave soup. Deucalion's foot slipped. He slid, 20 feet down a slope of slime, coming to rest against a dark, half-submerged shape. It was the bloated carcass of a great bull. Farther down, a dark tangle that had been a forest, now reduced to a pulp of splintered wood. The world was a landfill. He did not cry out. He just, slowly, pulled himself back to his feet, his entire body now coated in the grey filth. Pyrrha followed, silent, mechanical, They were not looking for a god. They were looking for a puddle. They were looking for any water that was not the sea, that was not the mud. After hours, or perhaps it was a lifetime of this nightmarish grey descent, they found it. A sound, the first sound that was not their own. Drip, drip, drip. It was the sound of water, clean water, from a sheer, black rock face, which the flood had scoured bare. A tiny, crystal-clear spring wept. It was the mountain itself, Parnassus, weeping its last pure tears. They fell upon it. They pressed their faces to the cold rock, letting the water, which tasted of stone and sky, run over their tongues. It was the first clean thing they had tasted in ages. It was a shock. It was a pain. It was life. As his thirst slaked, Deucalion sat back, and he saw. They were not just on a rock face. This place was built. A few feet from the spring, half buried in the same grey slime, was stone, but not the raw, scoured rock of the peak. This was cut stone, a threshold, a great, dark lintel. The flood, in its all-consuming rage, had met this one small place and parted. It had buried it, but it had not destroyed it. This was Delphi, but it was not the bright, golden, Apollonian Delphi that later ages would know. This was the first Delphi, the ancient, chthonic, terrifying Omphalos, the navel of the world. This was the primeval oracle of Gaia herself, the earth, before it was stolen by the sky gods. It was the temple of Themis, the titan of divine law, the daughter of earth, his father's aunt. They were at the very center of everything. Pyrrha saw it, and she shrank back. This was not a refuge. This was a source. This was the home of the very power that had judged them. Deucalion. No. But Deucalion, his face slick with clean water and grey mud, felt the first flicker of something that was not just survival. It was piety. It was purpose. They left us, he whispered, his voice trembling. They saved us. And they left. This is not an accident. He crawled forward. He did not stand. He was a beggar. He crawled to the dark, silent, slime-choked doorway of the oldest temple in the world. Pyrrha, her fear eclipsed only by her desperate need for an answer, crawled beside him. They did not go in. They knelt in the grey mud, two filthy, half-starved remnants before the silent, ancient stone. Deucalion pressed his forehead to the wet threshold. He prayed. His voice was a raw croak. Mother Themis, or Mother Gaia, whoever you are, we are here. We, Deucalion and Pyrrha, we have survived your judgment. The world is clean, as you wished it. He paused, a sob choking him. But it is empty. It is silent. Why? Why did you save us? To be the last? To watch a clean world die of loneliness? To be the ghosts in your new grey? Nothing? He struck the mud with his fist. If this is our reward, it is a punishment greater than the flood. If this is our punishment, then finish it. Let us join the others. He lowered his head. We are afraid. We are too alone. We do not know what to do. Pyrrha, beside him, could not speak. She simply knelt, her body shaking, her weeping a silent offering of despair to the ancient stone. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the empty, passive silence of the grave. It was the active silence of something, listening. And then, a sound. It was not a voice. It was not a whisper on the wind. It came from below. It was a groan, a deep, geological, tectonic rumble that came up from the mud, through the stone threshold, and into their bones. It was the sound of the earth itself, shifting in its deep, new-watered sleep. And in that groan, they felt words. The voice was slow. It was heavy. It was cold. It was the sound of mountains moving. Leave this sacred ground. Deucalion and Pyrrha recoiled, scrambling backward from the threshold. Cover your heads. Unfasten your garments. They looked at each other, their minds reeling. A ritual, a command. And cast behind you the bones of your mother. The stone groans ceased. The vibration in their bones stopped. The silence rushed back in. But now, it was a waiting silence. A watching silence. Deucalion and Pyrrha stared at each other. Their minds, already brittle from 9 days of trauma, tried to hold this new, impossible concept. The bones? Pyrrha's voice was a terrified squeak. The bones of our mother? She stood up, her entire body shaking. What mother? She shrieked, her voice cracking. My mother? Pandora? Your mother? Clymene? Their graves. Their graves are that. She pointed a trembling, mud-caked finger at the vast, grey, desolate world slurry. They are gone. We are supposed to. What? Dig through this. Filth. For the bones of our parents. And then throw them? She sank to her knees. A new, hysterical despair seizing her. It's a joke. It's a new, final, cruel joke. They are mocking us. Oh gods, Deucalion, they are mad. They are mad, and they are cruel. She was right. It was a grotesque, blasphemous, and insane command. To desecrate a grave, the one thing all humanity held sacred. Deucalion, too, was horrified. His heart was a stone. He stood, his back to his weeping wife. He looked out at the grey nothing. A joke, he whispered. But he was the son of Prometheus, the forethinker, the one who had solved the riddle of Zeus's sacrifice. It spoke, he said, his voice slow, his mind working, the gears grinding like the oracle's voice. After all this, a god spoke. It is not a joke. It cannot be. It is a riddle. The bones of our mother. He looked at Pyrrha, his wife, the daughter of hope. He looked at the temple, the house of Themis, the lawgiver. He looked at the weeping, grey, empty world. A god would not command a blasphemy, not Themis, not the goddess of divine law. Therefore, the law was not what he thought it was. The words meant something else. Our mothers, he said, his voice quiet. Our mothers are dead. They are dissolved. They are gone. But Pyrrha. He turned, his eyes for the first time, holding not terror, but a wild, electric, terrifying spark. The spark of an idea. Pyrrha. Who is the mother of all? The mother of the gods? The mother of the Bronze Age? The mother of us? Pyrrha looked up, her tear-streaked face uncomprehending. What? Deucalion knelt. He scraped away the thick, grey ooze with his hands. He cleared a patch of the mountain's true surface. He laid his palm flat against the cold, wet, solid rock. She is the Great Mother. He looked at his hand, then at the mountain. Gaia, Mother Earth. Pyrrha's eyes widened. A gasp. The Earth? And what? Deucalion said, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. What are these? His fingers, which had been pressing on the rock, closed around a loose, grey, angular fragment, a piece of the mountain, broken by the quake, scoured by the flood. He lifted it. He held it up in the pale, sickly, grey light. It was not a bone. It was a stone. They are her bones, he whispered. The stones of the earth. The bones of our great mother. He looked at Pyrrha, the madness of the trauma now replaced by the madness of divine inspiration. We are not to commit blasphemy, my wife. We are to build. The revelation was a spark, but the world was still cold. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, held the grey, wet stone in his hand. It was cold. It was heavy. It was utterly, profoundly dead. It was a piece of the dead world. Pyrrha, her face a mask of dried tears and grey slime, looked at the rock in his hand. It's a stone, Deucalion, she whispered, her voice brittle, on the verge of breaking. It's just a stone. The madness of the oracle, the sheer, crushing strangeness of the command, hung over them, to be saved from a world-ending flood, only to be given a riddle that, if misinterpreted, would see them commit a final, horrific blasphemy. Or, if interpreted this way, would see them, what? Throwing rocks into the mud. A joke, she whispered again, the tears welling. They are playing with us. No. Deucalion's voice was low, trembling. but not with fear. It was the vibration of a terrible, fragile, and divine certainty. The certainty of the riddle solver. It is not a joke. It is a right. It is the most important thing that has ever been asked. He looked at the stone. Lars. He looked at his wife. The oracle was precise. Themis. She is the goddess of divine law. She does not jest. And she did not just say, throw the bones. She gave conditions. He turned, facing the dark, silent, slime-choked threshold of the ancient temple. She said, leave this sacred ground. He took Pyrrha's hand and pulled her back, a dozen paces, away from the stone threshold, into a wider, flatter area of thick, grey mud. She said, unfasten your garments. They looked at each other. Their clothes, the simple tunics they had worn for 9 days and nights, were stiff with salt, filth, and drying mud. They were rags. Slowly, as if in a trance, they obeyed. They unfastened the bronze pins at their shoulders. Their garments, already torn, loosened, hanging off them. It was an act of unbinding, an act of ritual vulnerability. And Deucalion said, his voice barely a breath, she said, cover your heads. This was the final, terrible act of faith. To be blind, to perform this magic, this blasphemy, this creation without seeing, to trust the command utterly. Pyrrha, the daughter of hope, was trembling violently, but she did not refuse. Deucalion tore 2 strips from the hem of his ruined tunic. He handed one to her. They tied the mud-caked rags over their eyes. The world vanished. The grey, weeping, sickly light was gone. They were back in the box, back in the Larnax. They were in the absolute, total dark. But this time, they were not floating. They were standing on the cold, wet bone of the earth. Their other senses, starved for 9 days, now screamed to life. They could smell the sulphone stench of the mud. They could smell the ozone in the cold, wet air. They could hear the drip, drip, drip of the tiny weeping spring. And they could hear the thundering, terrified thump, thump, thump of each other's hearts. Deucalion? Pyrrha's voice was a child's, lost in the new, self-imposed night. I am here, as the oracle commanded. We must not look. We must trust. He bent his knees, blind. His ungloved hand sank into the freezing, gelatinous mud. He fumbled, his fingers closing around a loose, angular stone, the bone of his mother. He stood. He held it. It was heavy. This was it. The fate of the future. The answer to the riddle. He held the stone in his right hand, raised it, and as commanded, cast it behind him, over his shoulder. Squelch. The sound of the rock, Lars, landing in the thick, wet mud. It was a small, wet, pathetic sound. He and Pyrrha stood frozen in their blindness, waiting. Silence. Just the drip, drip, drip of the spring. Pyrrha let out a small, choked sob. Nothing. It was. Nothing. Wait. Deucalion hissed. A new sound. It was not the squelch. It was a groan. It was a low, wet, stretching sound, like thick clay being worked by a giant, invisible hand. It was the sound of the mud, moving. It was joined by a sucking sound, a thickening, a coagulating, and then a sound like a wet sail snapping in the wind, a hardening. Deucalion. Pyrrha's voice was a razor of terror. What is that sound? Throw! Deucalion yelled, his own voice cracking. Pyrrha, now! Throw your stone! She was crying, her body shaking, but she was the daughter of hope. She bent, her hand plunging into the ooze, finding a stone. It was smaller, smoother. She stood, and with a desperate, wailing cry, she too cast it behind her. Squelch. And again, the silence, followed by the groan, the stretching, the moulding. Now there were 2 of the sounds, a duet of effort. It was the sound of birth. And then it was joined by a 3rd sound, a sound the world had not heard in 9 days. A cough, a deep, wet human cough, followed by a gasp. The sound of new lungs, new life tasting the cold, grey air. Deucalion's hands trembled, fumbling at the knot of his blindfold. He tore it from his face. His eyes, burning, tried to focus. Where his stone had landed, the mud was rising. It was not a man. Not yet. It was a form, a pillar of the grey, stinking ooze, congealing, taking a shape. The stone he had thrown was at its centre, a dark heart, a seed. The mud was pulling together, thickening, hardening, like clay on a potter's wheel. It formed a torso, muscular, thick. It formed arms, legs, a head. It was a statue made of the world's filth. And as he watched, the outer layer of grey slime began to crack. It dried, flaking away like a chrysalis. Beneath it was stone, a form, like a rough-hewn statue. And then the stone changed. It warmed. The grey, hard colour softened, blushed. It became flesh. The figure, a man, naked, covered in a drying film of brown earth, stumbled forward. He fell to his knees. He looked at his new, strange hands. He looked up at the weeping grey sky. His eyes were not filled with terror. They were dull, confused, hard. Deucalion turned. Where Pyrrha's stone had landed, another form was rising. The same process. The mud, the stone, the flesh. A woman. She too stumbled free. She looked not at the sky, but at the earth, as if it were the only thing she understood. They were alive. Pyrrha, Deucalion whispered, his voice shattered with awe. It is true. Your mother, Hope. He did not need to tell her. She had already ripped her own blindfold off. She saw the two new, dazed, naked humans, and she saw the truth of the riddle. She bent down, her hands now working with a frantic, desperate energy. She began to gather stones. Deucalion did the same. They did not bother with the blindfolds. The rite was broken. The magic was understood. They began to sew. They cast the stones over their shoulders. Thud. Squelch. A man rose from the mud. Thud. Squelch. A woman. Again and again. Thud. 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 The silent, grey slope of Parnassus, which had been a grave, was now a field of creation. The silence was gone. It was broken by the sound of coughing, of gasping, of confused murmurs. This was not just a story of survival. This was a story of language. The ancient Greeks who told this tale were encoding one of the most profound truths of their and our existence. It was a divine, sacred, linguistic pun. The Greek word for stone is laos. The Greek word for the people is laos. The people, Laos, were born from stone Laos. But this was not just a clever joke. It was the why. It was the answer to the question, who are we? We are not the golden race, born of gods and living in effortless paradise. We are not the silver race, weak, immature, and ungrateful. We are not the bronze race, born of the ash spear, monstrous, and consumed by war. We, this new race, our race, are born of rock. What does that mean? It means our lives are laborious. We are born to toil. We are hard. We are stubborn. We are durable. We are not built for divine ease. We are built to endure. Our connection is not to the sky gods, not truly. Our connection is chthonic. It is to the earth, to the stone. This myth is the ancient world's explanation for hardship. It is the reason we must work the land, because we are the land. We are stone, animated by a divine riddle, and our destiny is to build, to endure, and to labour until we return to the earth that bore us. Deucalion and Pyrrha stopped throwing. Their arms ached. They stood, panting, in the centre of a small, growing crowd. A dozen, 2 dozen, men and women. They were naked. They were confused. They were covered in the primal clay of their own birth. They were looking at their hands, at the mud, at the grey sky, and then, as one, they turned. Their dull, new, stone-born eyes focused on the 2 figures who were not like them, the 2 who had thrown them, the 2 who were clothed in the rags of the before world. They did not speak. They did not know how. They just looked, waiting, expecting, Deucalion looked at Pyrrha. The absolute, crushing loneliness was gone. The silence was broken. But the true, monumental, and impossible work, the work of building a new world, with a new, hard-hearted, stone-born race, that had only just begun. They were not just survivors. They were now the king and queen of mud, the mother and father of stone. This moment on Parnassus, this strange, muddy, and miraculous birth, it feels unique. It feels profoundly Greek. A story of riddles, of piety, of divine law, and of language itself. Las and Laos, stone and people. And yet, as Deucalion and Pyrrha stand in the grey ooze, surrounded by their new, hard-born, dazed children, do you not feel a tremor? A sense of déjà vu? A righteous man, a divine warning, a world consumed by sin, a great boat, a survival, a mountaintop landing, a new beginning. If we pull our focus back, up from the peak of Parnassus, up from the shores of Greece, so high that the world becomes a single marbled sphere, we see a strange and profound mystery. This story is not a story. It is perhaps the story. It is a memory, a psychic scar, carved into the collective imagination of almost every culture on Earth. The Greeks were simply telling their version of a dream that humanity has been having, over and over, since we first learned to speak. The tale of the Great Flood is a universal echo, and if we listen closely, we can hear the other voices, the other survivors, telling their own tale. Let us travel, for a moment, in our minds. Let us leave the grey slopes of Parnas and go eastward. Let us travel to the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization itself. Here, in the world of mud-brick ziggurats and the first written words, we find a story so ancient it makes the tale of Deucalion seem young. It is written on clay tablets, in the wedge-shaped script of cuneiform. It is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in that epic, the great hero Gilgamesh, seeking the secret of eternal life, finds an old, old man. His name is Utnapishtim. He is the one human who has eternal life. And Gilgamesh asks him how. Utnapishtim's story is chilling. In his time, in the city of Shuruppak, the gods had a problem. The great god Enlil, the god of wind and storm, could not sleep. Why? Because humanity, his creation, was too loud. This is the first, profound and shocking difference. The Mesopotamian gods did not send a flood because of sin, or hubris, or blasphemy. They sent it because humanity was noisy. We were a successful experiment that had become an annoyance. This is not a moral judgment. It is the cold, exasperated decision of a tired landlord. It reflects a worldview in which the gods are not shepherds, but capricious, powerful, and easily irritated forces. The universe is not a test. It is simply chaotic. Enlil convinced the council of gods to wipe humanity out. But one god, Ea, the god of wisdom, had a crisis of conscience. He could not break his oath to the other gods, so he did not warn Utnapishtim directly. Instead, he went to Utnapishtim's house, a simple hut of reeds, and he whispered the secret to the wall. Reed hut, wall, wall. Listen, reed hut, and pay attention, wall. Man of Shuruppak, tear down your house and build a boat. Forsake possessions and save life. Take aboard the seed of all living things. Ea even dictated the dimensions, a vast 7-decked cube-shaped ark. Utnapishtim did as he was told. He built the great boat. He loaded his family, his craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. The storm came. It was a terror. It was so vast and terrible that the gods themselves, the very ones who had ordered it, cowered. The epic tells us that the gods huddled like dogs. The goddess Ishtar wept for her children. They had unleashed a force they could not control, and they were terrified. For 6 days and 7 nights, the flood raged. On the 7th day, it calmed. Utnapishtim opened a hatch and looked out. He saw a flat, silent ocean. The world was gone. He too landed on a mountain, Mount Nisir, and he too wondered what to do. But his ending is not Deucalion's. He did not receive a riddle. He did something practical. He released a dove. It flew, found no land, and returned. He released a swallow. It too returned. He released a raven. The raven flew, and it did not return. It had found food. It had found land. Utnapishtim stepped out, and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He made a sacrifice. A great, sweet-smelling offering of cedar and myrtle. And the gods? The gods who had been starving because with humanity gone, there was no one to make sacrifices, no one to feed them. They smelled the smoke. And the text tells us, the gods gathered, like flies, around the sacrifice. It is a shocking, almost pathetic image. They were hungry. Enlil, the god who had ordered the flood, was furious that Utnapishtim had survived. But Ea, the god of wisdom, calmed him. Do not punish all, for the sin of some. Let us be more precise. And so, as a reward, the gods granted Utnapishtim and his wife the one thing they had stolen, eternal life. This is the oldest story, a story of capricious gods, of near-total annihilation, and of a survival that was, in the end, about feeding the divine. Now, let us travel again. Let us go to another land shaped by a great river, the land of the Nile. The Egyptians had a flood myth too, but their flood was a flood of blood. The great god Ra, the sun, had grown old. Humanity, seeing his age, began to plot against him. They mocked him. Enraged, Ra sent his eye, the goddess Hathor, in her terrible form as Sekhmet, the lion-headed killer. She was unleashed, and she loved it. She waded through Egypt, slaughtering humanity, drinking their blood. She was a divine, killing machine, and she would not stop. Ra, seeing the carnage, had a change of heart. He had ordered a culling, not an extinction. He had to trick her. He ordered thousands of jars of beer to be brewed, and dyed red with ochre to look like blood. They poured it all over the fields. Sekhmet, thinking it was a great pool of blood, waded in and began to drink. She became, impossibly, divinely drunk. She fell asleep, and she awoke, as Hathor, the gentle, cow-godded of love. Humanity was saved, not by a boat, but by the divine drunkenness of their own executioner. Here, the flood is not water, but wrath, and the salvation is not piety, but trickery. It is a story about the duality of the divine, of the rage and the mercy that exist in the same God. Now, let us travel to a third, and perhaps the most familiar, tradition. Let us go to the mountains of Ararat. In the ancient Hebrew scriptures, we find a story that echoes both the Greek and the Mesopotamian, but it has been transformed. Here, it is not a pantheon, it is one God. And the reason for the flood? It is not because humanity is loud, it is because humanity is wicked. The text says, "The wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." The reason, like in the Greek tale, is moral, but the emotion is profoundly different. Zeus felt a cold, logical disgust. Enlil felt a peevish irritation, but the God of the Hebrew Bible feels regret. The Lord, the text says, regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it pained him to his heart. This is not a capricious king. This is a grieving father, a creator who is heartbroken by the failure of his own creation. And so, he finds one man, Noah, who is righteous in his generation. He gives him precise instructions. A great ark, gopher wood, 3 decks, a single window, and the animals, 2 by 2. The flood comes, 40 days and 40 nights of rain. The waters of the deep burst forth. It is a total uncreation, a return to the primordial, watery chaos of the before time. The ark, like the others, comes to rest on a mountain, Ararat. Noah, like Utnapishtim, sends out birds, a raven, and then a dove, which returns with a fresh-plucked olive leaf, the symbol of a new peace. Noah steps out. He too builds an altar and makes a sacrifice. But the ending? The ending is the master stroke of this story. God smells the pleasing aroma, and he does not just accept it, He does not just gather like a fly, he makes a promise. He establishes a covenant, a sacred binding, contract with all of living creation. He says, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, and never again will I destroy all living creatures." And as a sign of this unbreakable, divine contract, he places his warbow in the clouds, the rainbow. In this story, the flood is not just a reset, it is a trauma that changes God. It is an event that forces a new, permanent, and merciful relationship between the divine and the human. It is an explanation for the beauty of the rainbow and the deep, abiding hope that the world, for all its wickedness, will not be destroyed again. So, Mesopotamia, Greece, Israel, Egypt, we could go on, to India, where Manu is saved from the flood by a great fish who is an avatar of Vishnu, a story not of punishment, but of the cosmic cycle of creation and destruction. We could go to the Anishinaabe people of North America, where the Great Spirit, Gitche Manitou, sends a flood, and the world is rebuilt on a small patch of mud from the back of a turtle. The echo is everywhere. Why? Why this story? One theory is the ice. It is perhaps a historical memory, a true one. 10 to 12,000 years ago, the last great ice age ended. The vast, mile-high glaciers that covered Europe and North America melted. The sea levels did not just rise, they surged. Coastal communities, where humanity had thrived for millennia, were drowned. Whole landscapes vanished in the space of a generation. There is a specific, powerful theory, the Black Sea flood. The Black Sea, for millennia, was a smaller, isolated freshwater lake, far below sea level. But as the Mediterranean swelled with meltwater, it finally, catastrophically, burst through the thin strip of land at the Bosporus. With the force of 200 Niagara Falls, a wall of saltwater poured into the freshwater lake every single day, for years. The water level rose 6 inches per day. It was an advancing, terrifying, unstoppable flood that consumed an area the size of Florida. The people who lived on those shores fled. They ran, and they remembered. They carried this story, this trauma, with them to Sumer, to Greece, to the north. It is possible that Utnapishtim and Deucalion and Noah are all the cultural grandchildren of a single, real survivor who stood on a hill and watched a saltwater ocean devour his world. Or, perhaps the reason is simpler. Perhaps it is psychological. Perhaps the flood is not a memory of water. It is a memory of chaos. It is the fear that the order we build our cities, our laws, our families, is a tiny, fragile ark, floating on a vast, dark and primordial ocean of chaos. And the flood is our fear that, one day, the chaos will return, that our own noise or our own sin will be the thing that sinks us. The Greek story, with its riddle of Las and Laos, is humanity's answer. Deucalion and Pyrrha are not just two Greeks. They are Noah, they are Utnapishtim, they are Manu, they are us. They are the symbol of our endurance. The flood is the story of our greatest fear, that we are not worthy and that we will be wiped away. And the survivor is the story of our greatest hope, that when the waters recede and we are left on a cold, muddy, and silent mountain, we are not, in fact, born of gods. We are born of stone, and we will endure, and we will pick up the pieces, and we will begin the hard, long, laborious work of rebuilding the world. So the silence of the grey world is broken. It is broken by the sound of coughing, of gasping, of the confused, guttural, and unformed sounds of new life. Deucalion and Pyrrha stand in the center of their miracle, their arms aching, their hearts hammering. They are surrounded by a small, dazed tribe, the first of the Laos, the people born of Las, the stone. And as we stand with them, in this cold, grey dawn of a new age, we must ask the final question, the most important question. Why this story? Why did the Greeks, a people of such staggering intellect, of such profound poetry, of such deep philosophy, tell this version? What does this myth, in its strange, specific, and beautiful details, tell us about them? It is not just a story, it is a key It is a key to unlocking the entire Greek worldview. Let us, for a moment, look away from the miracle and look at the reason. The sin of the Bronze Age, the act that demanded the flood, was not noise, as it was in Mesopotamia. It was not a cosmic, inherent wickedness, as in the Hebrew tale. It was hubris, and its symptom was the failure of Xenia. Lycaon, the Wolf King, did not just commit a murder, he tested a god. He held his own intellect, his own cruelty, to be equal to, or greater than, the divine. He looked at the sacred order of the universe, the law of guest host, and he spat on it. To the Greeks, this was the ultimate sin. Not evil, not noise, but arrogance. It was the sin of forgetting your mortal place. Zeus, then, is not a grieving father. He is not an irritated landlord. He is the judge. He is the enforcer of the cosmic order. His flood is not an act of passionate, regretful anger. It is an act of cold, necessary, balancing justice. The slate must be wiped clean, because the equation has become unbalanced. And so, he wipes it. The Bronze Age is gone. But look now at the survivors. This is the master stroke. Who survives? Not just a righteous man. The survivor is Deucalion, the son of Prometheus. Prometheus, the titan of foresight, the titan of intellect, the titan who defied Zeus, not with arrogance, but with compassion. And his wife is Pyrrha, the daughter of Pandora. Pandora, the woman who unleashed all the evils of the world, but who, at the very last second, trapped Olympus' hope in the jar. Do you see? The survivors are not random. They are an allegory. They are the children of intellect and hope. This is what the Greeks believed was the key to survival. Not just blind faith, not just blind luck, but the intellect to understand the world, and the hope to endure it. And how do they save the world? They do not wait for a covenant. They do not wait for the divine to simply give them a new world. They are given a riddle. Themis, the goddess of divine law, does not give them an instruction. She gives them a puzzle. The universe, to the Greeks, was not a kingdom to be obeyed. It was a divine riddle to be solved. Deucalion, the son of intellect, solves it. He uses his mind. He interprets the text. He understands the sacred pun. This is the fundamental difference. The Greek hero is the one who thinks. His survival is an act of interpretation. And finally, the result, the new human race. Laos, the people of stone. This is the most profound, most beautiful, and most somber part of the entire myth. Why did the Greeks tell themselves they were born of rock? Because it was a cosmic humility. It was the antidote to the hubris that had destroyed the last age. To be born of stone means, first, that you are not divine. You are not golden. You are common. You are of the earth. You are heavy. It means, second, that your life is not a gift of paradise. It is by its very nature laborious. The Greek word for labor, ponos, is also the word for pain. To be human is to toil. We are not born for the garden, we are born for the quarry. We must work the hard earth because we are the hard earth. And third, it means we are resilient. We are durable. We are hard. We are built to endure. This new race, the Iron Age, the age we live in, was defined by its suffering, but it was also defined by its profound, stubborn, rock-like endurance. This myth is the Greek explanation for the human condition. It is an explanation for why life is hard. It is an explanation for why we must work. It is an explanation for how we survive, not through divine grace alone, but through intellect, Deucalion, and hope, Pyrrha. The other flood myths end with a new relationship between God and man. The Hebrew flood ends with a covenant, a promise, a rainbow, a new, loving, defined relationship. The Mesopotamian flood ends with the gods being fed and the hero becoming a god. The Greek flood ends with a job. It ends with two cold, tired, and traumatized mortals standing in the mud with a crowd of confused, newborn, stone-hearted strangers. Zeus does not appear. There is no rainbow. There is no covenant of love. Themis is silent. The gods have moved on. Their part is done. The message is clear. The gods enforce the balance, but the rebuilding, the work, the hard, cold, muddy, and thankless job of creating civilization from the bones of the earth. That the gods leave to us. It is perhaps the most terrifying, most honest, and most human of all the flood myths. It is a story not of redemption, but of responsibility. Deucalion and Pyrrha, the son of intellect and the daughter of hope, look at their new, hard, stone-born children, and they know the true labor has only just begun. And so, the silence of the new world is filled. It is not yet a happy sound. It is the sound of confusion, the sound of new lungs drawing cold, wet air. It is the sound of work beginning. The great, dramatic, thundering act of the gods is over. The lightning has been put away. The trident is at rest. The sky has wept itself dry. The roaring, grinding, annihilating ocean has retreated to its new boundaries, leaving the world coated in its grey, wet, and fertile memory. The gods have had their say, and now they are silent. They do not appear to Deucalion and Pyrrha. There is no covenant. There is no rainbow. There is no promise that this will never happen again. There is only the work. There is only the cold, grey mud underfoot, and a small crowd of new, hard, stone-born people, their eyes dull and empty, waiting to be taught, waiting to be led, waiting to be shown what it means to be human. This, perhaps, is the most profound part of the Greek story. It is a story that does not end with divine grace. It ends with human responsibility. The story of Deucalion and Pyrrha is not truly a story about a flood. It is a story about lineage. It is a story about what we are made of. We are not made of gold, destined for paradise. We are not made of bronze, destined for war. We, this new race, our race, are made of stone. And this is the deep, quiet, and somber comfort of the myth. It is an explanation. It is an answer to the question that echoes in all of our hearts, in the quiet of the night. Why is life so hard? Why must we toil? Why do we endure so much? The Greeks answered, because it is our nature. We are Laos. We are born from Laos. We were not made for the garden. We were made for the quarry. We are built to be hard. We are built to be stubborn. We are built to endure. And the ones who lead us, the ones who teach us how to survive, are the children of intellect and the children of hope. Tonight, we have journeyed into a very old, very dark, and very wet world. We have stood on Olympus and felt the cold disgust of the gods. We have hidden in the halls of Lycaon and tasted the abomination that sealed the world's fate. We have been tossed, in the dark, for 9 days and 9 nights, in a small wooden box, listening to the sound of our entire world being erased. And we have stood, at the end, on a cold, silent, muddy peak, and we have seen life, miraculously, stubbornly, to begin again. Now, that story is over. The work of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the impossible, thankless, and necessary task of building a new world from the bones of the old, is just beginning. But our work, for today, is done. The clanging of our Bronze Age, the noise of our own time, the anxieties and the demands of our world, they can begin to fade. The sounds of your day can recede, like the great flood itself, pulling back, leaving behind only the quiet. The air around you is still. The world has been washed clean for a few hours. The sky, outside your window, is dark and silent. You are in your own Larnax, your own safe, quiet, wooden chest. The sounds of the old world cannot reach you here. You can let go. You are, after all, a child of the stone. You are built for endurance. And the most profound act of endurance is the sacred, necessary, and healing act of rest. Let the grey, quiet, misty world of Deucalion be your landscape for sleep. It is a world of silence, a world of beginning, a world waiting for the Sunday. You can close your eyes. You can let your own thoughts settle, like the mud on the new earth. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to solve. The riddle has been answered. All that is left is the quiet. All that is left is to drift. I am Mr. H, on Mystery History for Sleep, and may you awaken to a world that feels, perhaps, just a little bit reborn. Good night.